Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for a deep dive into something kind of juicy.
Juicy's right. We're going to be talking about infidelity today.
But not in the way you might think. I mean, obviously everyone has opinions about cheating, right?
Right.
But what I really want to get into is how do we even define infidelity these days?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's not so simple anymore. This book chapter we're looking at really highlights how slippery that definition's become.
Well, yeah, I mean, the author basically starts out by saying that no two people can agree on what it even is anymore.
Yeah, they even point out that the estimates of how many people cheat range from 26% to 75%.
26 to 75.
Huge margin of error.
That's crazy.
It really shows you how subjective it is.
So, is anyone actually faithful these days?
Well, the book's not about pointing fingers and deciding who's good and who's bad. It's more about understanding the different factors that make infidelity so complicated.
Okay, so less about judgment, more about unpacking the messiness. I like that. But where do we even begin with something that big?
Well, the chapter kind of breaks it down into three main elements: secrecy, what they call sexual alchemy, and emotional involvement.
Okay, I'm already intrigued.
So let's start with secrecy. The author argues that secrecy is actually the core of infidelity, no matter what the act itself is.
Okay, so it's not just about the actual act of cheating. It's the secrecy itself that is a kind of betrayal.
Right. It's this whole separate thing. And to illustrate this, they share this story about a guy named Max.
Okay.
He's a devoted father, loves his wife, but ends up having an affair. And the thing is, he's never going to tell her about it. He talks about how he feels all this guilt, but at the same time, he feels kind of excited, living this double life.
Wow. So much guilt, but excitement at the same time. That's heavy. Makes you wonder, is it really the cheating itself that's the problem, or is it the secrecy that just eats you up inside?
Yeah, and that's kind of what the book gets at. It says that secrecy gives you this feeling of autonomy, especially if you feel like you're stuck in other parts of your life.
Oh, interesting. So you create this other world where you have all the control, basically.
Exactly.
Huh. That makes me think about the whole privacy thing in relationships, too.
Yeah.
Where's the line between having your own space and, keeping big secrets?
It's a good question. And the book kind of leaves us with that question. Is there even a difference between privacy and secrecy when it comes to infidelity? It's definitely something to think about. But let's move on to the second part, that sexual alchemy thing you mentioned.
Okay, yeah, that phrase definitely caught my attention. What's that all about? It sounds pretty intense.
Well, the book is pointing out that it's not just about the physical act of sex. It's about the erotic charge, the longing, the fantasies, all that. The author argues that these things can be just as powerful, even without any physical contact.
Whoa, so even if you aren't physically cheating, just thinking about it could be a form of infidelity. That's a pretty wild concept.
Right. The book uses this example of a woman, Charmaine, who had this crazy, intense connection with a coworker, but she insists nothing physical ever happened.
Okay, but it sounds like it was at least emotionally charged, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the author doesn't say whether it was cheating or not. It's left open-ended.
Ooh, that's tricky. It makes you wonder, how the heck do we even define sex these days, especially with technology and everything?
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Speaking of, the book goes on to talk about this digital age dilemma when it comes to infidelity. And I gotta say, that was one of the most mind-blowing parts for me.
Oh, yeah, the digital age has definitely thrown a wrench in the whole thing.
It's crazy how many ways there are to cheat now, with sexting and online affairs and even virtual reality.
Right. I mean, you can basically create a whole other life for yourself online.
And that brings up a big question, right? Where's the line? Is a virtual hookup cheating if it never happens in person?
It's a good question. And honestly, there are no easy answers.
And then there's sexting. I loved how the author included all those justifications people use, it wasn't cheating because we didn't meet in person, or it's not sex because we kept our clothes on.
Yeah, those are always interesting to hear. It's funny, but also kind of sad, right?
Totally. It shows you the lengths people will go to convince themselves it's not a big deal.
And it all comes back to that secrecy thing we talked about. Technology makes it super easy to hide things, but it also makes it easier to get caught.
It's a double-edged sword, for sure. But, okay, we've talked about all the sneaking around and the digital stuff. What about the emotional aspect of infidelity? Because it seems like that's often what hurts the most.
Yeah, you're right. And the book emphasizes that emotional involvement is a huge part of it. And the book points out that infidelity isn't always these big dramatic love affairs.
Right.
It can be these kind of seemingly innocent friendships to go a little too far.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
where you start sharing things you maybe shouldn't be sharing with someone outside the relationship.
Oh, I can totally see that. Like when a friend is getting a little too close for comfort with your partner, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that emotional intimacy starts to feel like a betrayal, even if nothing physical is happening.
Yeah.
The book even uses this example of a guy named Ludo who fell in love during an affair. And for him, it wasn't just about the physical cheating. It was like this whole emotional earthquake.
Wow, that's intense. I guess it just shows you that what feels like betrayal is different for everyone.
Right. And what we consider cheating has definitely shifted over time, too.
Yeah. How
Well,
so?
the book argues that we're moving away from these like super strict religious or societal definitions of infidelity.
Okay. So it's not so much about sinning anymore,
It's more about breaking the rules of your specific relationship.
like breaking a promise.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But the problem is, a lot of couples never actually sit down and define those terms.
Right. You kind of just assume you're on the same page.
Yeah, so you end up kind of figuring it out as you go, and that can lead to a lot of misunderstandings.
Yeah, like, is it okay to vent to a friend about your relationship if they're the opposite sex? How much contact is too much with an ex?
Exactly. It's like we're playing this guessing game with boundaries, and that's bound to cause problems.
Oh boy.
You know, the book mentions that gay couples are often better at having those conversations up front.
Really? Why is that?
Well, they've had to fight for recognition of their relationships, so they're maybe more aware of the need to define those boundaries clearly.
That makes a lot of sense. But yeah, for a lot of couples, especially those who are caught up in that whole finding the one thing, it can be scary to talk about monogamy.
Yeah, it's like you're admitting that there's a possibility you could be attracted to someone else.
Right. And that can feel threatening to that whole idea of like being each other's everything.
Yeah, so we avoid the conversation, and then we end up in these messy situations.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, the digital age makes all of this even more complicated.
Oh, for sure. We talked about all the new ways to cheat, but it also gives you all these new ways to connect with people outside of your relationship.
Absolutely. Social media, online forums, even gaming, all these places where you can form these really strong bonds and share things you might not be sharing with your partner.
Yeah, it's like the internet is this giant echo chamber of temptation and connection all at the same time.
It is, and it just blurs those lines even further. Like, if you're spending hours every day chatting with someone online, is that emotional infidelity?
Right, even if it's totally innocent.
Especially if you're neglecting your partner in the process. It's a tough one.
No kidding. So how do we even begin to navigate this?
Well, the book doesn't give us easy answers, but it does a good job of laying out all the different ways this is playing out in people's lives. Like, it talks about how virtual reality is blurring the lines between real and imagined experiences.
Oh, yeah. That's so trippy. Like, if your partner is having a virtual reality affair, is that really cheating?
It's a good question, and there's no right answer. It all comes down to what you and your partner agree on.
Okay, so basically, instead of trying to follow these outdated rules, we need to be having more open and honest conversations about what fidelity means to us as individuals.
Exactly. Defining our own terms and boundaries.
Makes sense. I'm starting to see how this all ties together. So we've talked about the secrecy, the digital dilemmas, the emotional minefield. It feels like this whole conversation about infidelity is less about judging people's actions and more about trying to understand what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, and the book encourages us to look deeper, to explore the psychology of infidelity.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, like, why do people cheat? Why do we keep secrets? And why do certain actions feel so hurtful to the other person?
Okay, I'm listening.
And one of the things the book talks about is this concept called actor-observer bias.
Actor-observer bias. That sounds kind of complicated.
It is, but it's pretty fascinating. Basically, it explains why we're so much harder on other people than we are on ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Like, we expect other people to be perfect, but we give ourselves a free pass.
Exactly. And the book suggests that this bias plays a big role in how we view infidelity.
So we're quick to judge someone else for cheating, but when we do something wrong, we're all about justifications.
It's a very human thing to do. But the book argues that becoming aware of this bias can help us have more empathy for each other.
Oh, that's a good point, especially when you're dealing with something as emotional as infidelity.
It allows us to see both sides of the story more clearly and maybe avoid some of those knee-jerk reactions.
That's really helpful.
And the book goes on to explore all these other factors that contribute to infidelity.
Like what?
Well, things like unmet needs in the relationship, the desire for something new, even just plain insecurity.
Wow, there are so many layers to this.
There are. But the point is, understanding these underlying reasons is crucial for figuring out how to prevent infidelity or deal with it if it does happen.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here, from defining infidelity to exploring the psychology of it all.
We have.
But what about the aftermath? Does the book talk about how to deal with the fallout of infidelity? Like, can relationships even recover from something like that?
That's a great question, and it's something the book definitely addresses.
Okay, so we're back, and wow. I need a minute to process all this. It's like you think you know what infidelity is, but it's so much more complicated than that.
Right. It's definitely not black and white.
And right before the break, I asked if the book talked about how to, actually deal with it. Like what happens after infidelity?
Yeah, good question. Because it's one thing to talk about all the reasons why it happens, but what about the damage it does?
Exactly. Can you even come back from something like that?
Well, the book doesn't pretend it's easy. It acknowledges that infidelity can be devastating, like a huge blow to trust. But it also says it doesn't have to be the end if both people are willing to put in the effort.
Okay, so there's hope. Because honestly, after hearing all this, I'm kind of feeling pessimistic about relationships in general.
I get it. But in a way, the book actually uses all this complexity to argue for stronger relationships.
How so?
Well, it's like by understanding all the nuances, the triggers, the gray areas, you can be more proactive about building trust.
Oh, okay. So it's like by facing the dark side of relationships, you can actually make them stronger.
Right. And the book even gives some practical steps for dealing with the aftermath.
Oh, like what?
Well, no matter which side you're on, whether you cheated or were cheated on, the key is taking responsibility and being honest.
Yeah, I can imagine those conversations are rough. Any advice on how to make them a little less, explosive?
Well, the book stresses empathy
Makes sense.
for yourself and your partner and setting boundaries moving forward. Like, what does rebuilding trust look like for you? What needs to change?
So it's not about just pretending it never happened.
No, it's about facing the hurt head on and figuring out how to move forward together.
Okay, I like that. It's not about magically getting over it, but acknowledging that it takes time.
Exactly. It's a process. And forgiveness, too. It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
But sometimes, the book also says, walking away might be the best thing.
Oh.
Like if the trust is just too broken or one person isn't really sorry, sometimes staying together just causes more pain.
That's a good point. It's not always about fighting for the relationship no matter what.
Right. Sometimes it's about protecting yourself.
Man, this whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on, what infidelity even means.
Me too.
It's less about judging and more about trying to understand people, all the complicated reasons behind their actions.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think the book's message is hopeful.
How so?
It's saying that even after something as painful as infidelity, there's still a chance for growth, whether you stay together or not.
That's a good takeaway. So anyone listening who's going through something similar, just remember, you're not alone, and there's a path forward, even if you can't see it yet.
And like always, keep exploring these ideas, talk to your loved ones, and keep learning.
Because the more we understand about ourselves and our relationships, the better we can handle all the curveballs life throws at us.
That's right. So until next time, keep diving deep and keep those conversations going.
Thanks for joining us on this one. We'll catch you on